I want you to picture a scenario. It's one I think, well, most of us have been in.
Okay.
You're at a venue, or maybe a friend sends you a link, says you have to hear this, and you hit play. And what comes out isn't that smooth coffee shop background jazz. It's the other stuff.
The living thing.
Right, the living thing. And honestly, your brain just rejects it.
Mm-hmm.
You hear the drums doing one thing, the piano is seemingly in a different time zone, and the saxophone sounds like it's having a violent argument with itself. The immediate reaction is usually, I can't find the melody, or...
Why did this just turn into noise?
Exactly. It feels like the floor's tilting under your feet. And usually we just turn it off. We think, okay, this is too abstract, or I just don't get it. But today, we're going to challenge that reaction.
We are.
We're doing a deep dive into a text titled Jazz, the Physics of Structural Freedom. And the argument here is, well, it's pretty wild. It suggests that the confusion you feel isn't because you aren't smart enough to get the music.
No, not at all. It's the opposite, in a way.
It argues that your confusion is actually a biological signal that you are interacting with a complex cognitive system designed to test how we process reality.
That is the hook for me. I mean, we usually treat music as entertainment, right? Something to soothe us or distract us.
Sure.
But this source, which kind of builds on some earlier work about music as ontological practice, is saying, no, this is an edge case. This is a stress test for human coherence.
So our mission today isn't to teach you music theory. If you don't know what a flat fifth is, you are totally fine. We are going to unpack what this structural freedom tells us about the human mind, our need for control, and what happens when we, voluntarily step into the void.
Which, let's be honest, is a skill we could all probably use right now.
Definitely. The world feels a bit like a free jazz solo most of the time.
Right.
Okay, so let's start with that friction. The reason people turn that track off is because they think these guys are just making it up. There's no structure here. It's just chaos.
That is the #1 myth. It's just random notes. But the source flips this premise entirely on its head. It argues that the reason real jazz, and we're talking, Coltrane or Nat Coleman, that whole lineage, is so disorienting. It's not because it lacks structure. It's because it utilizes too much structure.
Too much structure. How can it have too much? That seems really counterintuitive.
It does, but hear me out. The argument is that jazz operates with a density of rules and relationships and mathematical interactions that just exceeds the bandwidth of the average person's pattern recognition.
Okay, so it's not that the room is empty. It's that the room is so crowded with furniture, I can't walk through it.
That is a great way to put it. Think about pop music or even classical. What makes it feel safe?
Repetition, a clear beat.
Repetition, but specifically a clear center of gravity.
Yeah.
You always know where one is. You know where the chorus is. It's predictable. The source says this kind of music stabilizes the self. It tells your nervous system, everything is okay. We know what comes next.
It's like walking down a hallway with handrails.
Exactly. Now, jazz removes the handrails. The text uses a concept from quantum physics to explain this. Superposition.
I know this term. Schrodinger's cat, right? The whole being alive and dead at the same time thing.
In that vein, yes. In physics, superposition is the ability of a system to be in multiple states at once. The source argues that jazz creates superposition in sound.
Okay.
So instead of offering one single center of gravity, it offers multiple centers. Rhythmic, harmonic, melodic, all competing, all valid, and all moving at the same time.
So instead of a solar system with one sun, you've got, what, 3 suns?
3 suns, and they're all dancing around each other. The gravity's constantly shifting under your feet.
That sounds terrifying.
It is. Viscerally, it is terrifying to the part of your brain that wants safety. The text describes that sensation perfectly. It says, the melody slips out of your hands, the harmony tilts sideways, and the focal point migrates from horn to bass to piano without warning.
That migration is what always gets me. Just when I lock onto the saxophone and think, okay, I'm following the story, the energy drops out and suddenly the drummer is driving the bus, but he's like driving off a cliff.
And that specific moment where you feel like the bus is going off a cliff, that's what the source calls the boundary of coherence.
The boundary of coherence.
And this is crucial. It says jazz operates at the very edge of the Aperture Band.
The Aperture Band. Okay, let's unpack this. What is the Aperture Band?
It's the zone between making sense and falling apart, between coherence and decoherence. Too much coherence, you get elevator music. It's boring, totally predictable. Too much decoherence, it's just noise. Unlistenable.
And jazz lives on the razor's edge between them.
Constantly. It's negotiation. And because it's a negotiation, it doesn't stabilize the self like a pop song.
Mm.
The source says jazz destabilizes the self just enough to keep the witness awake.
I want to put a pin in the witness because that gets into the psychology of this, which is fascinating. But before we go there, we have to talk about the tools they use to create this superposition.
Right.
Because the source makes this great distinction between the neighborhood and the universe.
I love this analogy. It really clarifies why jazz musicians sound the way they do.
So the argument is that most genres choose a neighborhood. Country music lives in a neighborhood. Punk lives in a neighborhood. What does that mean exactly?
It means they define themselves by exclusion. A punk band isn't going to play a diminished whole tone run, not because they can't, physically, but because it's just not punk.
Right.
They pick a set of tools, 3 chords, a distortion pedal, a certain attitude, and they build house there. And that's fine. It's great, actually. We love those neighborhoods.
But jazz?
Jazz, according to this source, chooses the entire universe. It describes jazz not as a style, but as partography. It is literally mapping the entire topology of what is physically possible with sound.
And the source proves this by just listing the scales. And I think we actually need to go through some of this list. It starts normal, major, minor, blues. Okay, we've heard those.
Standard stuff. The safe neighborhoods.
But then melodic minor, harmonic minor, whole tone, diminished, chromatic.
Okay, we're getting weirder. We're leaving the suburbs.
And then it just goes completely off the deep end. Bebop scales, altered scales, Lydian dominance, superlocrian, synthetic constructions, modal interchange, tritone substitutions.
Superlocrian is my favorite. It sounds like something from a sci-fi movie.
It sounds like a villain in a Marvel movie. I am the superlocrian. But seriously, what is the functional difference here? Why do they need so many tools?
Because each one of those scales represents a different emotional physics.
Yeah.
A major scale feels like a sunny day. It's stable. A whole tone scale feels like a dream sequence. It has no center. It just floats. An altered scale literally contains all the notes that create tension against the root.
So it's a scale made of anxiety.
It's a scale made of anxiety. It's a horrifying concept, but it's necessary. Because if you want to map the entire human experience, you can't just map the sunny days. You have to map the anxiety, the confusion, the drift.
So the list isn't just about showing off.
No, it's about saying a jazz musician needs to be able to access the full spectrum of distinction. They aren't just trying to be difficult. They're trying to be accurate.
Accurate to what?
To life. If the human experience involves joy, they have a scale for that. If it involves existential dread, they have a scale for that too. And they need to be able to switch between them in a millisecond because that's how fast life changes.
So when we hear that chaos in a solo, we aren't hearing a lack of choice. We are hearing the result of every choice being available simultaneously.
Precisely. It's the difference between walking a paved path in a garden versus being dropped into a thick jungle where you can move in 360 degrees. It's overwhelming, but it's undeniably more real in terms of the landscape.
Which brings us to improvisation, or as the source calls it, structural freedom.
Right. And I think this is another area where the layman, me included, gets it wrong. We think improvisation is just playing whatever you feel.
Like, I'm sad, so I'll play sad notes?
If only it were that easy. If you just played whatever you felt, it would sound terrible. It would just be emoting. The source says a jazz musician holds the form, the harmonic cycle, the rhythm, while simultaneously breaking it.
Holding the form while breaking it. That sounds like a paradox.
It is. Think of it like a really intense debate. You have to follow the rules of language. You have to listen. You have to stay on topic. That's holding the form. But you also want to surprise them, challenge them, maybe change the subject slightly to see if they can keep up. That's breaking it.
And doing it at 200 beats per minute with a piece of brass in your mouth.
Exactly. And this is where that Aperture Band comes back in. The text describes a cycle. Coherence. Then decoherence. Then coherence again. You build the structure, then you smash it to see what happens, then you quickly rebuild it before the song ends.
So the art isn't just the pretty melody. The art is the destruction and the rebuilding.
The source says, in jazz, the structure is the creativity. In other arts, you create within a structure. In jazz, the act of structuring itself is the point.
That explains why the text describes the music as alive, dangerous, and sovereign.
Dangerous is the key word, because there's a real risk of failure. You can crash.
You can absolutely crash. I've seen it happen. A player goes too far out, they lose the one, the band gets confused, and the whole thing just falls apart.
But when they pull it off,
Yeah.
when they surf that edge of total collapse and land the plane, That is a rush you just cannot get from a pre-recorded pop track.
The source has this incredible line that sums that up. It is the sound of a mind learning to survive drift.
Surviving drift. That hits hard.
It does, and that bridges us to the psychological side of this. Because if the musician is surviving drift, what are we, the listeners, doing? Why do we put ourselves through this? The text talks about the witness and the self.
This is where we get into the cognitive science, or maybe the spirituality of the piece.
So break this down for us, the self versus the witness.
Okay, so the self here refers to the ego, the part of you that wants identity, predictability, a simple story. I am this person, this is my favorite song, the chorus is coming next. The ego loves safety. It loves that handrail we talked about.
The ego wants the beat to be on one.
Always.
Ah.
And the witness.
Yeah.
The witness is that deeper layer of consciousness, the part of you that just observes. It's the awareness that remains present even when you're confused or scared or lost.
So how does jazz weaponize this?
Well, the source argues that jazz intentionally trips up the ego. By shifting the centers of gravity, by hiding the melody, by using that superposition, it forces the ego to give up. You literally can't predict what's coming next. Your pattern recognition fails.
So that moment where I go, wait, where is the beat? And I get frustrated. That's my ego flailing.
Yes, that's your ego throwing a tantrum because it's lost control. It's saying, I can't map this, make it stop. But, and here's the magic, if you can stay with it, if you don't turn off the track, the ego kind of exhausts itself. It goes silent. And in that silence, the witness has to wake up just to keep track of it all.
So the confusion isn't a bug. It's a feature. It's designed to bypass my thinking brain and access something faster.
Exactly. It forces you into a state of participatory witnessing. The source is very clear that jazz is not built for passive listening. It's not background music. It's training.
Training for what?
For reality. The source argues that this is, I'm quoting here, training for the nervous system to remain intact when the world stops behaving predictably.
Wow. Jazz is the human rehearsal for void-adjacent cognition. That is a heavy sentence.
It is, but think about the application. If you can sit and listen to a John Coltrane solo where he is tearing the harmony apart, and you can stay present, you don't check out, you don't get annoyed, you are essentially rehearsing how to stay present when your life goes off the rails.
You're learning to be comfortable with multiple centers of gravity in your own life.
Right. When you lose your job and your relationship is rocky and the news is terrible, that's superposition, that's drift. And usually our ego panics. But jazz teaches you that you don't have to collapse just because the structure is changing. You can witness the chaos without becoming the chaos.
That feels incredibly relevant. It's not just learning facts, it's upgrading your operating system.
It's cognitive conditioning. You are expanding your tolerance for ambiguity. And in a complex world, tolerance for ambiguity is a superpower.
Which leads us to the most metaphysical claim in the whole text. The source says jazz isn't a genre, it is a cosmogenic practice.
Cosmogenic meaning world creating, or related to the origin of the cosmos.
The source describes jazz as the void with a pulse.
The void learns to speak in human grammar. It's such a beautiful image. It's the closest humans can get to that raw cosmic chaos, the void, while still staying alive. It's a human-safe version of the void.
And this completely redefines what we mean by confusion. This was my biggest takeaway. The text says confusion is not the absence of meaning.
No, it is the presence of too many possible meanings.
That is a profound shift in perspective.
It really is. When we feel confused by jazz or by a complex problem in life, we think, this makes no sense. We feel a lack. But the source suggests, no, this makes too much sense. There are too many valid options. There's too much truth happening at once.
And that equals freedom.
That is the ultimate definition of freedom. Choice. Superposition. If there is only one melody, you have no choice. You're a passenger. If there are 10 melodies intersecting, you have to choose where to place your attention. You become the pilot. That is sovereignty.
So when we listen to jazz, we are practicing freedom. We're practicing the ability to stand in a storm of too much meaning and not shut down.
Exactly. It's controlled decoherence. We let things fall apart just enough to remember that we can survive the fall.
That is... Well, that makes me want to go listen to some Ornette Coleman right now, or at least try to.
It definitely changes the experience. You stop looking for the pretty tune and start listening for the structural freedom. You start rooting for the musicians to survive the drift.
It really does reframe the whole thing. We started this deep dive talking about the frustration of jazz, the missing melody, the chaos. But seen through this lens, that frustration is actually just the sound of your brain stretching.
It's the sound of the aperture widening. You're learning to process more complexity, and once you stretch that muscle, you can't unstretch it.
So, to synthesize this for everyone listening, jazz is a practice of controlled decoherence. It operates at the edge of what we can process using superposition, multiple centers of gravity to map the entire universe of musical possibility.
And by doing so, it acts as a training ground for the witness.
Yeah.
It forces us to let go of our need for simple, stabilizing narratives and teaches us how to remain present in the face of ambiguity.
It bridges the gap between perfect order and total dissolution. It's the void with a pulse.
Beautifully put.
Now, before we wrap up, we always like to leave you with a provocative thought, something to take with you.
We've talked a lot about how jazz is a rehearsal for handling uncertainty, for handling too many meanings.
Right.
So here's the question. If jazz is the practice of letting go of the single melody to embrace the freedom of the whole universe, where else in your life are you clinging to a single melody just to feel safe?
Oh, that's good.
Where are you forcing a simple narrative onto a complex situation? In your relationships, your career, your self-image, because you're afraid of the superposition? Where are you avoiding the confusion that actually signals freedom?
Are you avoiding the jazz of your own life just to keep the elevator music playing?
Exactly. Maybe it's time to let the harmony tilt sideways and see if you can survive the drift.
Something to think about. Thanks for diving deep with us today.
It was a pleasure.
We'll see you next time.